It's a psychic blindness that part of the blindness is that we don't know we're blind when we're afflicted with it. And, and it's actually the disease that is the fundamental disease that's enacting itself out in our world through us as individuals and collectively as a species.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 4 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring awakening inside of the quantum dream. My guest is Paul Levy. He is the author of Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil, Awakened by Darkness When Evil Becomes Your Father, and The Quantum Revelation, a radical synthesis of science and spirituality. He's been a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for 30 years, and he is also, I'm going to call him a Jungian practitioner, working with individuals and groups. Once again, this is an internet interview, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Hello, Paul. I'm delighted to be with you.
I am so happy to be here, Jeffrey. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure that we're actually connecting, and I guess it's worth mentioning. We've tried twice before and run into technical problems that interfered with really creating a broadcast quality video. In fact, the recorder just didn't work at all. The only time that's ever happened to me, which suggests maybe it's because we're dealing with material which is so powerful.
Yeah, that was my sense. I couldn't believe it. We did 2 full interviews. They came out great. And then both of them didn't record. So it really occurred to me, wow, it's as if some sort of darker force is not wanting the information I'm sharing to get out, or at least that was what I imagined.
And largely we were focusing in the earlier 2 interviews on your concept of the Wetiko, which is a dark force.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Wetiko idea, it's a Native American, it's a Cree Indians it's their term. And it really connotes this cannibalistic spirit, or the spirit of evil. And it's a psychospiritual disease of the soul, and whose origin is the soul or the psyche. And it plays itself out through the projective tendencies of our mind, we all have these, blind spots in our psyche. It plays itself out through our blind spots in such a way that we then unwittingly become the instrument to act it out in the world. And at the same time, it hides itself from being seen. And so it's actually this form of this blindness. It's a psychic blindness that part of the blindness is that we don't know we're blind when we're afflicted with it. And, and it's actually the disease that is the fundamental disease that's enacting itself out in our world through us as individuals and collectively as a species, that we're actually seeing getting enacted and embodied and played out in the greater body politic of our world. And the thing about Wetiko because it's such an amazing idea when you really understand what it's actually pointing at. It's a psychospiritual disease of the soul whose origin is the human psyche, like I've been saying, and yet it has this magical ability to somehow extend itself out in the world and configure events in the outer world so as to synchronistically reflect what's going on inside a psyche that's under its thrall. So that's amazing because it actually dissolves the boundary, which doesn't even exist, between the inner and the outer in such a way that, it actually reflects itself through the outer world. And what I'm describing, where an inner situation in the psyche is actually getting reflected through the outer medium of the world, that's a dream. That's exactly a way of describing a dream, where the outer dreamscape is actually reflecting the inner state of the dreamer.
That's a very complex thought, but it also suggests to me that certain people are more afflicted, apparently, than others, although it's a collective disease. We all share in it, and one of the symptoms seems to be pointing at evil outside of oneself.
Right. So we all have Wetiko. It exists in potential in the collective unconscious of our species, and it feeds off of polarization and fear and separation and otherness. So if somebody's embodying like that spirit of Wetiko, and if we point at them thinking, oh, they have Wetiko and we don't, then that very perspective that we've just assumed is an expression that we've fallen under the thrall of the bug, so to speak. And and the idea, the actual understanding that any of us, to the extent that we become fully and utterly enlightened, whatever, even if that's even possible, but until that point, we all can potentially just think about it. Who among us hasn't acted out their unconscious? We all do. That's the way we become conscious, is to act it out. So we all are, have like the propensity to fall under the spell of our unconscious and then unwittingly act out Wetiko. And when you see that, you discover, oh, wow, there's a humbleness that arises out of that. And that humbleness, that's the inoculation against the disease, combined with when you see somebody else who's embodying Wetiko, not only do you understand, oh, we all potentially have that, but being a dream, because the way to see Wetiko is and we'll talk about this, is to tap into the dreamlike nature of reality, is to understand that what they're embodying, if they're, say, at that moment taken over by the Wetiko spirit, they're actually this dream character reflecting that, dark, sick, wounded, evil, whatever, however you would characterize it, that part of oneself.
I think it's well understood in psychology, and even the average layperson can grasp the idea easily that every figure, every image, every character that appears in a dream is really an expression of one's own psyche.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because when you begin to see the dreamlike nature, which is what Wetiko is actually revealing to us, then you discover, oh, we're all dream characters, which means we're not separate from each other. We're all interconnected, interdependent aspects of each other. And that's a whole other way of actually beginning to see. Because the thing about Wetiko, it only has power over us to the extent we don't see it. So that's why I was saying it acts out through our unconscious, through the blind spots, through the projective tendencies of the mind. As soon as we see how it operates, both out in the world and within our own minds through our unconscious reactions, then all of a sudden we begin to take away its autonomy and its power, and we actually start to empower ourselves. So if I could just describe in real, like, sort of essential form, like, one way, because there are like so many ways that I've imagined in pointing at it, because my work is basically trying to point at this entity or seeming entity, because it actually doesn't even exist. That's the ultimate, that's the crazy part, is that ultimately Wetiko doesn't have any independent intrinsic existence separate from our own mind. And what that is implying, that's showing that we have this incredible untapped invisible power. Each one of us does, this creative power, but to the extent we're not awake to it, then we unconsciously acted out in a way that's killing us, as is evidenced by what's happening in the world. So if I could just describe in essence how Wetiko works, and one really simple way of understanding it, just through the imagination. Imagine you're in a dream at night, and imagine you have a particular point of view in that dream. Well, that viewpoint that you're holding is going to get reflected back by the dream, because the dream is nothing other than your own mind. So whatever viewpoint you hold, instantaneously, not both over time and in no time whatsoever, outside of time, the dream will reflect back your viewpoint, because the dream is nothing other than your own psyche. And then all of a sudden now you have evidence confirming your viewpoint, that it's objectively true. So then you get even more fixed in your viewpoint of what you're seeing is actually objective, separate from you. And the more you hold that viewpoint, but the more the dream will just give you evidence confirming the seeming truth of your viewpoint in a feedback loop whose source is our own mind. And what I just described is we have this genius power of creating reality, of co-creating reality with the universe. And what Wetiko does, one way of conceiving of it, is that it plugs into our creative genius in such a way that it turns us against ourselves, so that we imprison ourselves by the reality creating function and the creative genius and unbelievable power that we have unknowingly inside of all of us. And it turns it against us to the point where it's killing us. And so what I'm pointing at in my work is trying to shed light on that process. And there's no one else doing that to us. There's no Wetiko out there. There's no evil forces out there who's doing that to us. We have it's like we've entranced ourselves, we've hypnotized ourselves, tricked ourselves in a way out of our own mind. And so what I'm pointing at is that, hey, look, when you actually shed light on that process and see it, you begin to connect and get in phase and in alignment with that just incredible creative power that we have to create our experience of ourselves and our experience of the world. And that's where quantum physics comes in. So I'll just want to offer that, and I can say a lot more about that.
I think the really intriguing step that you take in all of this is, if I understand you correctly, you're really saying that what we think of as the external objective world around us is also like a dream, that everything is a reflection of ourselves.
Right, that's exactly it. And that's the segue into quantum physics, because that's what quantum physics really discovered. So, before quantum physics came on the scene, all of the physics community thought that this world was objective and that we were just studying this subjective world and trying to understand how it worked. And so then 100 years ago, a little bit longer, onto the scene comes quantum physics, and it basically empirically proved there's no such thing as an objective world. And one other way of saying that is that they discovered that the act of observing the world actually influenced the world that you were observing, which is to say, so the observer is the observed, the act of observation, the object observed, and the process of observing were all one interconnected quantum system. And what that means is that the act of observation is creative. You see, it's shedding light on that we are creative beings, and we're creating our experience of ourselves and of the universe each and every moment. And so that's the rabbit hole. That's that I go, because I wrote a book about quantum physics, because basically what that's showing us, that is literally revealing, quantum physics is revealing to us the dreamlike nature. It's literally showing us that this is a dream. And not only is it showing us this is a dream, quantum physics and the revelations that are emerging from quantum physics are themselves the expression of the very dream that it's revealing. And so why I bring up quantum physics is because quantum physics is the medicine for Wetiko. Because Wetiko, if you remember, I was saying it operates through the projective tendencies of our mind in such a way that we actually entrance ourselves, putting ourselves under a spell. And one way of understanding that is, we actually, by operating through the projective tendencies of the mind, which we're always projecting. So we project onto the waking inkblot, and we, create whatever experience or perception we're having. And then, like I was describing in that dream metaphor, we then entrance ourselves into thinking that what we're seeing out there is objective, is separate from us. And then we react to it and we become conditioned by our own projection. And so that, in a sense, is one way of understanding, the Wetiko virus, because it's like a virus of the mind. Interesting, viruses are so much, on all of our minds right now. Well, Wetiko is the real fundamental. It's a higher dimensional virus that the coronavirus, we can talk about this, is actually a lower level emanation into our world and into our minds. But the source of that is the Wetiko virus. And I'm just finishing up a big article about that. But if I could just describe even a little bit more how Wetiko maps onto this, because say if any of us, aren't connected with our shadow, with our darker half, right? And we're all familiar, I want to own my shadow. Well, the way that process works, so think about it. You split off from your own shadow. So what happens? It gets projected outside of you. So just imagine, being in a dream. Because, if you remember, quantum physics is showing us the dreamlike nature. So if this is some sort of dream and we project out our shadow, well, then into the dream is going to walk some person or a group of people who are going to carry that projection and who are going to embody that shadow that we've dissociated from and projected outside of ourselves. And as soon as they come into our dream, all of a sudden, now we have evidence. Oh, the dark of the shadow is out. The evil is out there. And so we don't recognize that it's actually that we're looking in a mirror. And so then what happens? What do we typically do if that process gets really unfolded? And that is we try to kill them, because we're just basically acting out in the world the very inner process of trying to get rid of and kill our own darkness by projecting that side of ourselves. When it appears in front of us, we enact that very inner process on them. And by trying to kill them in that way, whatever way we do, we then are literally becoming possessed by the very evil that we're trying to kill in the outside world in a mind-created feedback loop that's totally insane. And, and of course, the more I see them in that shadowy way, the more they're going to manifest that way. And the more they manifest that way, the more evidence I have to confirm my viewpoint. That's the feedback loop. That's how Wetiko works through the psyche and through projecting the shadow. That's the psychological mechanism that Wetiko works. But then bringing in quantum physics. So I was describing Wetiko gets entranced by the projective tendencies onto our world, thinking the world's objective, becoming conditioned by it. Well, then here comes quantum physics saying, oh, by the way, that world that you think is objective, there is no such thing. That's a nonsensical idea. That's an antiquated idea. That's a false idea. And the thing which is amazing is when you begin to see through that illusion of the objective world, something really unbelievable happens. And what happens is all of a sudden you begin to question, wait a second, what about the subject? What about who I am? If there's no object out there, I need an object to be in relationship to if I'm going to be a subject. When I more and more understand that there is no object, there's no objective anything. This is quantum physics has empirically proven this. When you really take that in, it all of a sudden sheds light on the nature of who you are. And that's where quantum physics has promoted itself to become a spiritual tradition, because it's actually shedding light on our true nature.
I think there's a paradox there because if subject-object distinction isn't real, then the idea that quantum physics can empirically prove anything has to be called into question, because empirical science depends on a subject-object distinction.
That's so interesting to contemplate, because in a way we have literally dreamed in quantum physics into the universe 100 or so years ago, into the world through physicists' minds and into our minds. And so, the idea of what is real. Well, one thing that quantum physics is saying is that this universe is of the nature of a dream. It's not like a dream. It's not sort of metaphorically talking. This is like a dream. Quantum physics is basically the revelation of the dream to us. It's showing us, it's proving to us that this is a dream. And if I could talk about that, so in Tibetan, because I do Tibetan Buddhist practice, you could probably tell just from, in back of me. And, they're the tradition that I do practice too. There's a tradition called Terma. And the Terma tradition, it actually translates as the hidden treasures. And the idea of the Terma, and it's how the lineage actually will regenerate itself and keep itself fresh and propagate itself so it doesn't get like stuck in dogma or it just, kind of becomes some sort of idol that's not really, having this immense power. So the Terma tradition, the hidden treasure, that tradition, what it's about is that there are these hidden treasures, hidden, encoded in the fabric of the universe, because the universe, like a dream, is multidimensional. And sometimes the treasures take the form of a blessed object or a teaching. And one way to think about it, it's an alarm clock that right at the time that we fall asleep or that we become, if you think about it, if we get like one-sided and we're too, whether it's, I'm too sort of into, whatever, like I'm a materialist, say, and I've forgotten the spiritual, the idea being it's like a dream. A dream is a compensation. When you get one-sided, the dream will compensate symbolically. The language of dreams are symbols. And interestingly, quantum physics is a symbolic procedure. And so all of a sudden you get one-sided or asleep in a certain way, your unconscious through your dreams will offer you a symbol that if you recognize it, it will get you back in balance. So termas or the hidden treasures, they're these, in a way, these symbolic crystallizations that come into our world and out of our world. And they're like these vitamins that the universe secretes to help us to get ourselves back in balance. And it's a real thing. It's not just some sort of fairy tale thing. Scholars study this Terma tradition. Like, this is like an amazing thing. This is how this lineage, propagates itself, to the current day over centuries, and to transmit these enlightened teachings. And what I'm pointing out, I just gave a talk about this a few months ago, that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a Terma. In other words, we have dreamed up quantum physics into our universe so as to help us remember who we are, to help us remember our incredible creative power, and, to connect us with the immense creativity that we always have 24/7, but to the extent that we're unconscious of it, like I've been saying, that creative power gets turned against us, both individually and collectively, in a way that's killing us. So that in essence, the idea that quantum physics is actually a Terma, is a hidden treasure, and it's not the only Terma. Like, there are like countless Termas that are emerging in our world. And, but quantum physics is one of them that I think has this relevance when we're talking about the Wetiko mind virus.
Because essentially, as I understand it, what quantum physics is saying, the Schrödinger equations of quantum physics in particular, suggest that reality, as described by these fundamental equations, is a big probability field. It's not solid at all until we observe it.
Right. That's exactly right. And that's actually when you really contemplate just that, what you just said, it's so inspiring. And I'll just give you an example. So, and now keep in mind that quantum physics has discovered that this universe is quantum on all scales. It's quantum through and through. So even though it's the study of the really, really small, trying to find the building blocks of this universe, it actually has discovered, that there is no fundamental substantial building block separate from our own consciousness. That's really interesting, but it's also, like I was saying, discovering that this universe is quantum through and through. And here's one way of understanding that with what you just said, Jeffrey, that really I think is helpful, in that you have these quantum entities, and before they're observed, they exist in a state of potentiality in such a way that they, any and every way they could ever potentially manifest, they manifest, or they're existing in this potential parallel universe. And as soon as we observe that quantum entity in whatever way we do, all of those potentialities just vaporize and disappear as if they never existed. And then one of them will actualize. at that moment. And that's what we call reality. Now, here's the thing, which is amazing. What quantum physics is saying is that even if one of those, countless potentialities was, to quote a quantum physicist, highly, incredibly, ridiculously unlikely, it could still be the very universe that manifests right now in this very next moment. And so all of a sudden it enlarges the realm of the possible, of what's possible. Because, for example, if we think because of what's happening in our world right now, things are hopeless and, we're destroying ourselves and, destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet, and then totalitarianism. And by the way, Jung, didn't know the word Wetiko, but he, actually was really switched on to the idea. He called it a number of different names all throughout his collected works, but one of his favorite names for it was totalitarian psychosis. Okay. And think about what I was saying before, that the thing about Wetiko, it's like this pathogen that subsumes and co-ops the healthy parts of the psyche into its service so that it colonizes the psyche and creates a shadow government. And so it like dictates like a dictator to the ego. So it sets up a totalitarian regime in the human psyche that's afflicted with it. Well, remember what I said, that Wetiko, it's actually reflected like an iteration of a fractal through the outside world, where the macrocosm mirrors the microcosm. So that inner state of being afflicted by Wetiko and having your mind colonized by this like totalitarian sort of this regime, that's actually getting reflected through the outside world. And once we recognize that actually expands our consciousness because we're seeing the dreamlike nature. And that point of view helps us to dispel Wetiko. But if I could just go back to what I was trying to say about when we get, entranced by the horrors that are playing out in our world today and the suffering and the nightmare that's happening, and we become pessimistic, then by holding that viewpoint, we're then going to draw evidence to confirm our pessimism in a mind-created feedback loop, such that we become not the solution, but we become part of the problem. But when you understand that quantum physics is saying, hey, even if something is incredibly, ridiculously unlikely, it can still happen. That means that the fact that our species could sufficiently wake up in time to avert the impending catastrophe, that's a possibility. That's an absolutely real possibility according to quantum physics. And if we're not envisioning that, then what are we thinking? The idea being is that this is the power of our dreaming, that we have this incredibly creative power. And when you see Wetiko, you don't want to become fascinated by it, but seeing it, then that's the inoculation. And then as a sovereign being, we can invest our attention in creating the world we want to live in. So then we can actually dream up and envision a world in which we're all actually having the recognition of our interconnectedness, our interdependence, that if I help you, it helps me. That's the world that I'm dreaming. And it's more and more of us are dreaming that world together. Then by the power of our dreaming, we can literally materialize that into that's the incredible creative dreaming power that all of us have.
Now, when I think of dreams, normally I think of them, they're my dreams. They're inside of my head only. No one else is responsible for my dreams but me. But when we look at reality, external reality, it seems to me that there's a Buddhist term that seems appropriate. I think it's something like mutually dependent co-arising.
Right. Interdependent co-origination. And I've written extensively about that. And it's basically, that's an expression of, that there's no thing, there's no objective anything, including us. Like I only exist as a being, and I'm in relationship to you. I don't exist intrinsically, independently from my own side, but I exist, in this relation to you. But you don't exist as an independent, intrinsically existing, objective person, because you only exist relative to other beings who themselves don't exist objectively or independently or intrinsically, but they exist, in relation to, and we all exist interrelated to each other, and there's no like fixed point. This is not a reference point. in and of itself. We're all part of an interconnected, interdependent web. And we're not just these separate aspects of the web that are interacting. No, that's still a subtle form of seeing in a dualistic way. Quantum physics is pointing out the wholeness of this universe, that this universe is seamlessly whole on every level. And like just one thing I want to just contemplate for a moment, one way of understanding what I'm talking about through the imagination and entering into imagine we're having a dream, and imagine you're in a dream, and imagine all of a sudden you have the recognition that you're dreaming and you have lucidity. And then imagine that some of the other dream characters who are just aspects of yourself, they're also waking up to the dreamlike nature and having lucidity. And imagine you all come together and hang out and you just trip out on what you're realizing. You contemplate it going, oh my God, we're in this universe. This is a dream universe that we moment by moment are co-dreaming into materialization together moment by moment. And that's always been the case, but we didn't realize it. And because we didn't realize it, we were dreaming it up in a way that was deeply problematic. But, and I'm just imagining, as more and more people who are having that realization come together and share what they're realizing, it's what I call, they're realizing their sacred power of dreaming. It's the part of us that's dreaming the dream moment by moment into materialization every moment. The question is whether we know it or not. But as we wake up to that and we connect with each other, we can put our sacred power of dreaming together in a way to change the dream, in a way that makes a difference, in a way that we can, it's an evolutionary impulse that we are invited to participate in our own evolution through this realization. And what I just described in a night dream, that's what's actually offered to us in the waking dream.
Now, you wrote at one point that if the Wetiko didn't exist, and I think by Wetiko we could talk about Satan or the Archons or Ahriman or any other sort of evil demonic force.
Right.
If it didn't exist already, and as you point out, it doesn't really exist, but if it didn't, we'd have to create it.
Right, exactly. I talk about that in my book because it is the greatest catalyst for human evolution that we need. And an example being, just think of, here's the Buddha under the Bodhi tree and he's about to become enlightened, and then all the darker forces, the evil one, here's this Mara figure who's tormenting him and trying to seduce him and really trying to obstruct him in any way that he can from attaining enlightenment. And from one point of view, oh, wow, that Mara figure, that evil energy is like, kind of like this adversary and really getting in the way of Buddha's realization. But when you have like a deeper point of view, you understand, no, Mara was secretly Buddha's ally, that Mara helped Buddha to develop the muscle of realization that catapulted him out of the separate self, into the realization of our oneness, into enlightenment. And what I'm pointing at is that in these darker energies, because think about it, in a dream, when darkness is really visible and palpable, that's an expression that an incredibly powerful light is nearby. And so what I'm pointing at is that encoded in the darkness, it's actually potentially helping us if we recognize that. And a way to understand that is like Wetiko itself is a quantum phenomena. And what I mean by that, a quantum phenomena, here, think about light. Well, when quantum physics, came, the advent of quantum physics, they discovered, oh, wow, what is the nature of light? Sometimes it appears as a wave, sometimes as a particle. Is it a wave or a particle? Well, it depends how we observe it, right? That was the experiment, the two-slit experiment that really, completely had encoded within the whole experiment all of quantum physics right there. And it was where consciousness intruded into the physics lab and they couldn't make it go away. And so the idea that here's light, that what is its nature? It depends how we observe it. Well, the same, and keep in mind that waves and particles, you couldn't even imagine more opposite entities. And so here's Wetiko. Wetiko is the source of the most incredible archetypal, not just personal, but archetypal evil that we enact on ourselves, with each other, between each other and amongst ourselves as a species. And encoded in Wetiko is the most profound blessing. It's helping us. It's a terma. Not only quantum physics is a terma, but Wetiko is a terma, a hidden treasure. It's actually a revelation. It's showing us the dreamlike nature. And by showing us the dreamlike nature, what that means is that it's unlocking the incredible creative power that all of us have. But to the extent we don't know it, it boomerangs and kills us. And so is Wetiko, so in a superposition of states, being a quantum phenomena, Wetiko both contains the deepest evil that can destroy us, or the most, not just its medicine, but an actual blessing. It's actually helping us to wake up. And how it manifests, just like light, it's a function of how we observe it, of how we dream it. That's what this is all about. That's what my work is trying to get out to people. And when more and more of us have that realization, and like I was suggesting, connect with each other and activate our collective genius, and have the realization we can conspire to co-inspire each other, which is a true conspiracy theory. We can have the recognition of our interconnectedness, that we're not separate, and put our genius together in a way that we can dream ourselves awake. That's another way of saying it. And that's freely being offered to us. And there are very few, there are actually lots of people who are talking about it, but I just want to add my voice.
What you're saying reminds me of what I think is one of the most mysterious and profound statements that come out of the Christian tradition. I'm not a Christian, but I keep thinking about this all the time. When Jesus said, resist not evil, I think it's a very subtle point, but I think he was trying to say something along the same lines that you're getting at.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because that brings up how I discovered what I'm talking about. And it was through personal experience that almost killed me because, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but I'm an only child, and my father unwittingly, was a channel for Wetiko. He just like people do, to the extent they're not, doing their own inner work, well, then they unwittingly act out their unhealed abuse. And my father did that. And being a sensitive kid like we all are, I was the recipient, and it just created enormous suffering. And to the point where I went from being a highly accomplished kid to not being able to live my life. And then I went so deeply inwards into my mind to try to get to the root of that. I was in my early to mid 20s, and I had a huge, mind-blowing spiritual awakening that got me, and I was so excited and enthusiastic of what I was realizing, which is that, hey, we're having a collectively shared dream. I was realizing that, and it was completely blowing my mind, and there's no way you can be prepared for that. At least I wasn't. But I was so excited that it got me in deep trouble. It got me hospitalized and diagnosed, and my parents bought into the diagnosis. And then, after a number of years later, they died, completely convinced that I'm just deluded and mentally ill and in denial of my illness. So it had a real tragic aspect, but I was fortunate that I was able to get out of the psychiatric system really quick and continue my awakening, because it was being reflected back to me that I was mentally ill, that I was bipolar, that I would have this illness for the rest of my life. And as I was being diagnosed, I was diagnosing the psychiatrist as just being incredibly just stupid. They had no idea, what I was going through. And thankfully, not for 1 second did I buy into their diagnosis, but I knew it was just made so clear to me that I was having an awakening. And so, but the point is, I began to recognize, because with my father in my family system, whenever I was pointing out the darkness that he was playing out, it was like the whole field non-locally configured to protect the abuser. And then psychiatry came in and they aligned with my father. And I became the identified patient, and I became the one who was sick or bad or evil or whatever it was. And the one who was actually the real channel for evil, everybody was protecting him. And I began to realize, oh my God, there's, this is crazy making. It was driving me out of my mind. And I was realizing it's showing me something, that it's this revelation of a deeper, higher dimensional process that's playing out in our world. And when you see, that was when I began. I didn't have the name for it. So when I wrote my first book, about the badness of George W. Bush, it was all about Wetiko, but I didn't have the name yet. So I was calling it malignant egophrenia. It was an aberration of the human ego. And in a way, so the short name was malignant egophrenia, could be abbreviated as ME disease, me disease. It was a misidentification of who we think we are, to the extent that we unconsciously identify. You see, the thing about Wetiko here, it hates when I do this, but I'm trying to articulate. Here's how it works. In the apocryphal text of the Bible, they talk about Wetiko. They call it the counterfeiting spirit. So Wetiko puts us on, which has a double meaning of putting us on like a suit of clothes, but also it is a deceiver. It fools us. So it puts us on and it impersonates us. It's an imposter. And if we're unaware of what's happening, we then identify with its false version and limited version of who we are. And then we unwittingly have offered ourselves to become a conduit or an instrument to act out Wetiko in the world. And all the while we're identifying, it's like when you get like this tapeworm in your organism, and the tapeworm secretes chemicals. So you start craving certain food, and you're eating the food thinking you're feeding yourself. And meanwhile, the tapeworm is getting bigger. You're actually feeding it and until it kills you. But it doesn't want to kill you too soon, or then it would suffer the inconvenience of having to find a new host. So that's like Wetiko. It apes us. And interesting in, the whole idea of that Satan is the ape of God. And so it apes us and impersonates us. It's this mimic. It's a mime. And, it puts us on, and then that's how it fools us. So in essence, we then, you see, Wetiko can't steal our soul. It tricks us into giving it away. So that's where we then give away ourselves, and we then disconnect from our own power. And that's the state of asleep humanity. And so that's why I'm basically pointing at that the medicine is all around us. It's freely offered to us. It's when enough of us actually wake up to the incredible, intrinsic creative power of our genius. That's who we are.
Well, that's very elegantly put, Paul. And, I know we could talk about this for a long time, and I hope we have many more conversations, but this is so deep and so profound, I don't want to overload our viewers right now. And so I think this may be a good point to pause. It's really been a delight to be with you. I think this is one of the most profound conversations that I've been able to offer to our viewers on the New Thinking Aloud channel. So I'm very grateful for our time together, and I hope we can do many more, because I know there are all sorts of variations on these essential topics we've been discussing.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate it, Jeffrey. And let me just say, I feel like we just barely scratched the surface. I mean, it's such a mind-blowing thing, really.
It is, and I think you're really putting your thumb on the heart of one of the deepest issues that affects all of us. And it's an urgent issue also, but I think that it doesn't help us to become alarmed by it. We have to face it with a certain amount of poise and calmness. So I'm looking forward to many more conversations with you, Paul.
Well, really appreciate that, Jeffrey. Same here. Thank you.
Thank you for being with me. And for those of you watching this video, thank you for being with us.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.